Yeah, if you do want us to build a free Black Friday, Cyber Monday hourly tracking report with the purchase of a Prophit System, that's going on right now. That offer is going on right now for the next week or so. And this is, by the way, open to, unlike some of our other things, this is open to 7-figure brands as well. So if you're anywhere from 7 to 9 figures, this is absolutely going to change the way that you approach Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So obviously, I highly recommend it. I think one thing that worth pointing out too is that like the hourly shape of Black Friday and Cyber Monday is very specific in a way that like the hourly sort of customer behavior is not on other days. So there's like, because there's such like clear hourly changes, it's really, really important to understand how you're performing relative to those on an hourly basis as opposed to a daily basis. So anyway, if that's something that you want, and I think you do, you know where to find us, commonthreadco.com, hit that hire us button, let us know that you're interested. We would love to chat. This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Finaloop. Most e-com founders are drowning in spreadsheets, waiting weeks to figure out if they're actually profitable. Sound familiar? Switch to Finaloop, the only accounting service built for e-commerce and multi-channel brands. Syncing directly with Shopify, Amazon, your bank, and apps, Finaloop gives you real-time financials and dashboards that speak your language. Get 50% off for the first 2 months and see the value from day one. Links in the show notes. Hey folks, welcome to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Common Thread Collective. And I'm joined today by our VP of e-commerce strategy and sometime war reporter. He's out there on the front lines in the e-com trenches reporting for us. It's Mr. Luke Austin, also my co-host on the DDC hotline. Check it out. But Luke, what's going on today, man?
We're in November. It's official.
Exactly.
And with that, I think the early bird sales have, some of them been launched. The others sort of in the midst of doing that. And then Black Friday, Cyber Monday is right around the corner. So there's this anxious anticipation that hangs in the air for all D2C operators, marketers, and teams, that we are very much in that state with you all as well. But excitement to push forward the next few weeks and see what it has in store.
That's right. Exactly. It is that time of year. And that's what we're talking about today. Of course, what else is on anyone's mind? And the thing that we're going to focus on today is around the concept of hourly tracking over Black Friday, Cyber Monday weekend. And what we're going to have Luke do is kind of make the case for why hourly tracking is so crucial in this obviously crucial time. But I should preface this by saying, and after Luke talks through this, it's going to make a little bit more sense here. But by the time you're hearing this is going to be the 4th of November. And for the following week until the 10th, we are offering a free Black Friday, Cyber Monday hourly tracking report that comes with the purchase of a Prophit System, which again, to remind those of you who have forgotten, it's our spend and forecasting model. Will model out 12 months of revenue for you, give you a sense of what daily targets should be across all of your different key platforms. But not only that, in this upcoming week, we're also going to be offering this hourly BFCM tracking report. So with that out of the way, let's actually jump into what this is. And I'll throw it over to you, Luke, to make the kind of pitch to us about why hourly tracking is so important.
Yeah, so I thought we'd do this through the lens of a couple examples of brands last year, Black Friday and Cyber Monday weekend, that we worked with to be able to execute on hitting forecasts and using the hourly targets to do that. So I'm gonna pull up 2 specific brands that we'll walk through, and we'll have the conversation through that lens of why it is crucial to not just have hourly targets in place for these big days, but then how do you actually operationalize against hourly targets? What is it, once you have the hourly targets, what does it enable you to do, right? What is the behavior that it helps to instill and create within your team? And so I think we'll start with the first brand here. And each of these brands, the lens that we're looking at this with was each of these brands had a high risk of missing either their Black Friday or Cyber Monday target. Brand 1 was pacing on Black Friday well behind what their revenue forecast was. And then brand 2, Cyber Monday, was at risk based on the pacing for that day. And both of them, because of the transparency of the hourly targets and what it allowed us to see, we're able to course correct really meaningfully to help bridge that gap. And so I think this will sort of come to light and hopefully be helpful to folks in terms of how we think about operationalizing hourly targets in their workflow. And to the offer we're running right now, we want to be able to create the forecast out through our Prophit System and hourly targets for as many brands as possible. So it could be something that we partner with you and to be able to help make reality.
Cool. All right. Well, let's jump into it. So You mentioned that this first brand that we're going to look at here is a brand that would have missed their Black Friday target. They were pacing behind early in the day, presumably, but because we had an hourly pacing build for them, or rather an hourly tracking report, we were able to correct that before it was too late. So let's jump into that right now.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So this first brand, and for those watching, we'll have a screen share pulled up. For those listening along, we'll describe what we're talking through here. But for this first brand, what we have up here is on Black Friday, we landed -1% to discounted sales target for the day. An ad spend landed +16% to target. So from first glance, this could be read as, okay, we hit the revenue target slightly under 1%, whatever, but we had to spend 16% more to get there. From an efficiency standpoint, from a profit standpoint, that's not a great outcome. It might be the first read of this, which this day in isolation could be read as that. But I'm going to zoom out to what was happening the days leading up to this, because it's really important to frame the execution over Black Friday and where it landed. Before we talk through the specific examples, though, I want to talk through hourly tracking and how we approach this in terms of the methodology and the specifics of these numbers. So we're not going to talk through much of the forecasting process that goes into our profit system. We have many conversations and episodes around that, of how we use the spending power model, the retention model, the event effect model, the marketing calendar, ad spend, incrementality, and measurement to build out a P&L level forecast for every single month of the year, and then break that down into daily targets that then have day of week effect overlaid with the marketing calendar to help get us to really high level of granularity in our daily targets, which allows us to be really close to landing a forecast across our data set where less than 2% on either side of missing forecast. So 98% or better to goal over the course of this year. As it relates to hourly targets, though, we take that same process, each of those steps, and once we have the daily targets, the main way that we're looking at hourly pacing is we're overlaying the target for this specific day against the hourly pacing of the year prior for that same day, right? So we have a forecast set for this year, and that is based on all the factors and the process that I mentioned, which is going to be a target that's different than the target for that same day of last year. It's going to be higher or lower than last year for that specific day. But then in terms of the hourly pacing, we look at every single hour of the day, the composition of that hour of revenue, spend, efficiency for each of the hours by day. And then we take the target for this year and we look at the overlay of that against the same pacing as last year. Because what it allows us to do is be able to see the number we're after this year against a similar behavioral pacing of last year. That's helpful for a number of reasons, which we'll talk through here. But in terms of the visual we have up and what we'll be talking through, that's what we're looking at. Is we have the forecast set for this day of this year, and then we're decomposing that on an hourly basis based on the last year's hourly pacing for that specific day, to then see if we're pacing ahead or behind and in which specific metric, and be able to make the adjustments accordingly. So that's what we have in the hourly tracker here. We call it compare target to last year by hour. So target of this year by the hourly pacing of last year is a lens at which we're looking through this, which helps us to get a better understanding of our pacing throughout the day.
Most e-com founders I know are drowning in spreadsheets, waiting weeks just to figure out if they're actually profitable. Sound familiar? Here's what I tell them. Switch to Finloop. It's the only accounting service built specifically for e-commerce and multi-channel brands. Instead of piecing together QuickBooks with a bookkeeper who really doesn't get COGS or inventory, Finloop's team handles everything and actually gets it. They sync directly with Shopify, Amazon, banks, ad accounts, and give you real-time P&L and cash flow that speak your language. Want to know if that new SKU is making money? It's right there on the dashboard. Planning a raise or thinking exit? Your books are already investor ready. And honestly, it costs less than what you're paying your current bookkeeper for slow surface level financials. I've seen too many founders tank their brand because they didn't know their numbers. Don't be one of them. Try Finloop. You get 50% off for the first 2 months, and you'll see the value from day one. Links in the show notes. Yeah, and just to clarify for those who are listening, the kind of top chart that we're seeing here, if I'm understanding this correctly, is, so what you have is basically Black Friday of 2024 here.
Yep.
Is pulled up and it's broken down by performance by hour. And then there's a chart above it that shows the sort of hourly performance overlaid against 2023's Black Friday performance.
Yes.
I would presume, right? And what you can see is that there's a very strong correlation between those two lines. I mean, there's some discrepancies here and there, but overall, the sort of these two lines, what actually happened on 2024 and then what happened in 2023 in terms of the buying behavior over the course of the day follows roughly the same curve, which just goes to sort of reinforce that idea that looking at last year's behavior is super beneficial for thinking about what hourly pacing should look like.
Yes, that's exactly right. And there's two important things for us to chat about as it relates to this approach, which is, I think it's clear to most of us that if your marketing calendar, your promo schedule, your email send cadence, if that's similar to the year prior, then this approach should yield very similar correlation in terms of your hourly tracking, right? Like you should expect we're running the same business, very similar customer subset or potential customer subset and the behavior associated with them. And we have a similar offer going out and email send cadence, et cetera. Our hourly pacing should look really similar. So this approach makes a lot of sense, right? Like, and for many brands that would be the case. And then the second response to this might be, well, how does this help us if we're doing things different this year, right? So we're looking at the hourly pacing relative to last year's hourly pacing. That makes sense if all things are held consistent. But how does this help us if we are doing something different than we did last year? And the answer to that question is it helps you to see how you're doing compared to last year. It helps you to know if the things that you have changed in your marketing calendar, your email cadence, et cetera, if those are improving or not improving relative to what you did the year prior, and not just improve, yes, worse, yes, but like what is the magnitude to what the impact of these things, right? So helps us understand how are we doing relative to the activities we did the year prior, and then how are we quantifying that as well? To what extent are those changing? And so I think it's important that we all understand that having a frame of reference in order to assess the performance and the impact of these decisions is really important. And this brand that we're looking at, I think, is a good example of that. So as I mentioned, on Black Friday, we landed -1% to discounted sales target, and we landed 16% ahead of ad spend, right? So it's spend more to get to right at our forecast goal for that day. But what's important is we're going to zoom out here to the day prior, to Thursday. And on Thursday, this brand does a VIP early access launch, like many of us do, to its existing customer set through email and SMS channels. It's a really high percentage returning revenue day. And then the sale goes live early access a couple hours later. But Thursday is the first day of the sale towards the back half of the day. And what we have pulled up here on the hourly tracker is that Thursday landed 65% ahead of sales target, and we landed 20% ahead of spend. So Thursday meaningfully outperformed what the expectation was by 65%. In this case, that's a little over $100,000 relative to what the expectation was. And then we were able to spend more volume than we expected as well based on that pacing, so 20% ahead. And the reason for this is what we can see in the hourly pacing here is last year, the sale launched at 4 p.m. Pacific. And so that's the first sort of hourly spike we see in terms of the revenue pacing is 4 p.m. Pacific spike. And then an SMS was sent out 2 hours later. So it was early access email, then wait 2 hours, then the SMS that went out local time for the remaining, subsequent few hours of the day. And so you sort of see like two spikes happening through the course of that day as those communications were sent at different times and the cadence was different. This year, 2024, what we did, right? So last year relative to the year prior, we went out at an earlier time. We actually did an early access VIP through SMS prior and did that 2 p.m., so 2 hours earlier in the day. And then we did the full sort of maximum list available on email blast 2 hours later. And then that did local send time tapered off throughout the rest of the day. And so what you can see in the hourly pacing is we started ramping up revenue earlier than we did the year prior, right? Because we did the SMS send earlier, and then we did the email send and it started to taper off through the day. And that led us to beating the revenue target substantially. What this allowed us to do, again, I think through the lens of this year prior was very different in terms of the marketing calendar cadence than the year before. And so what was helpful in this case is to understand what the impact of that different set of activities was, right? We had a hypothesis around sending the SMS first, sending out earlier, doing the email send in this cadence, but we need to quantify what the actual impact was. And in this case, it led to a revenue day that was 65% higher than the year before, as it allowed us to drive that volume through the day. And then the subsequent action that led us to be able to engage in is increasing the ad spend investment over the course of that day. So we've toggled in the chart here from looking at the sales by hour to the spend by hour. We're able to ramp up ad spend earlier in the day because the offer went out earlier, which allowed us to drive more volume as well. And then we kept sort of the same hourly pacing for the remainder of the day. So we got like an extra 2 hours of spend ramp up, which for a shorter day like this, when we're doing an afternoon VIP early access launch, was really valuable as well. So Thursday, the day prior, meaningfully beat the revenue expectation that allowed us to spend 20% more than we had planned for that day. But at the end of all of this, we actually underspent the opportunity on Thursday. We left volume on the table relative to what was available to us by only spending 20% more against 65% higher revenue target. Our new revenue landed 26% ahead of goal. So we had more room to be able to push ad spend volume over the course of this day because it was even stronger than we anticipated it would be.
Yeah. Okay. So then let's talk about how that affected like what happened on Black Friday of 2024.
Yes, exactly. So this was the outcome of Thursday. And so we go into Friday looking at, okay, we beat expectation meaningfully. This was the adjustments to the VIP launch on Thursday were even more impactful than we thought. We were able to push more volume, but we left volume on the table. So when you look at Friday in isolation, again, we landed -1% to revenue goal for the day, but spend landed 16% ahead. So what we have on the chart here is we can see our revenue pacing over the course of the day was pretty strong relative to the year prior. But when we toggle over to ad spend, what we ended up doing on Friday is spending much more aggressively the first half of the day and into the early afternoon relative to what the pacing was the year prior. And so we have the hourly spend target breakdown chart here up. And what you can see is our hourly pacing up to about the 4 a.m. hour was really commensurate with the year prior. But then the subsequent like 6 hours, 7 hours, we outspent each of the hour pacing. We kept a higher ad spend over the course of those hours. And then in the evening, it sort of tapered off and kept more consistent with the remainder of the day. Now, why did we do this? The main reason was because we left volume on the table on Thursday, right? We underspent. We actually realized too much of the profit expectation relative to the revenue on that day, which allowed us to have the dollars available on Friday to be able to spend more to make sure we arrived at the revenue target and didn't leave that on the table relative to Thursday. And so you can see the sort of like net impact of this is if we look at Thursday and Friday in aggregate, which we have pulled up here, we landed 14% ahead of revenue target for those days on aggregate and 16% ahead of spend target. So really dang close to the expectation of total ad spend volume against the revenue expectation for those 2 days in aggregate. But that came after Thursday being a much more meaningful beat and us leaving volume on the table and then us taking those additional dollars and deploying them on Friday, overspending against the expectation to make sure the aggregate landed at the expected goal. If we didn't have the transparency into how much of an impact those different actions on Thursday made and then what the hourly pacing was relative to the target, and then Friday, we had just allowed to spend to goal, right? Like allowed it to spend 0% to forecast, like right at goal instead of spending 16% to forecast. Our revenue would have landed 10, 12% behind for Black Friday, right? We would have just continued to leave the volume on the table and the total for those days would have been below expectation relative to the revenue outcome.
Yeah. Okay. So to clarify then, our ability to track hour by hour, at least on Thursday, revealed to us the fact that there was an opportunity here that we were potentially missing if we had just sort of continued business as usual. So because we had that insight, we were able to on Friday then make some pretty major adjustments to the way that we were approaching Black Friday in order to realize, the potential revenue, right? So talk to me about like how the actual like hour, like understanding of hour by hour performance on Friday impact decision making?
Yeah. So on Friday, we'll pull back up the hourly pacing here. What we can see is that starting about the 4 a.m. hour, the 4, 5, and 6 a.m. hour, our revenue outpaced the expectation relative to what the hourly targets were. So we were doing better the 4, 5, and 6 a.m. hours relative to where we thought we would be. But then what we started to see is the 7, 8 a.m. hours tapered off and started to hit the same level as the year prior. And then you can see the 9 and 10 hours then started to be below the hourly pacing prior, right? So like the morning hours, like, oh, we're actually potentially pacing ahead here. Then it starts to get back, plateaus back to the pacing last year. Okay, this is commensurate. And then it starts to dip down. And the indication there would be, okay, we may have pulled some of the more of the revenue forward, right? By doing the earlier launch and the email SMS communication. And so these hours are going to be softer. And so we started to see the softness of the revenue during those sort of mid-morning hours there in terms of the revenue. And so you have a decision to make at that point, right? Okay, we lean in the morning. We saw a strong outcome. We're starting to see slower revenue pacing over the course of these hours. What should we do as a result? Should we pull back our ad spend pacing commensurate with that, right? Like the 10 a.m. hour landed 22% behind the revenue goal based on the hourly targets for the 10 a.m. hour on Black Friday. So do we start to pull back our ad spend so that the day in aggregate or the remaining hours of the day, we pace, 10, 15% lower than the hourly expectations? Do we hold things consistent, hoping that our revenue is going to pick up? Or do we actually double down and try to make up some of the revenue gap? So that's what the hourly targets in this case surface that specifically in terms of here's the decision that we have to make relative to the ad spend that we're going to be allocating over the remainder of the day. Now, the context of Thursday, if we had on Thursday, let's say landed 20% ahead of revenue target and 20% ahead of spend, right? So we had sort of matched up to the revenue expectation. Then the decision on Friday at that 10 a.m. hour, again, likely would have been, let's keep our spend consistent with the daily targets. Let's not over-index. Let's not pull back too soon, right? Because we know the Cyber Monday evening revenue peak. But let's keep things consistent because Thursday we sort of like spent right up to the goal of where the revenue landed. Friday we're like right in the mix there, so we don't want to overextend, but we don't want to pull back too aggressively. That wasn't the case though, because Thursday was 68% ahead of the revenue target. So we had underspent what we could have over the course of that day. And so then the conversation on Friday becomes, okay, this is where we're at. We're seeing softness in some of these revenue hours. We have a lot of additional revenue banked from Thursday relative to the expectation. And we know later this day, we're going to see that increase. And so what we're going to do is actually double down on the ad spend over the remaining hours. And so what I switched to here for those listening along is the hourly pacing of ad spend over the remaining hours. And you can see at those 9, 10 a.m. hours when the revenue started to soften, our ad spend actually started to pick up. We started to push more ad spend volume over the course of those hours to help sort of push against that curve over the remainder of the day so that we made sure to stay at the revenue expectation. And that's what we continue to track over the remainder of the day is how our revenue is pacing against target. And it was slower for a few of those hours. And then as a result of us leaning more into the ad spend, right, over these hours, the evening hours picked up and ended up pacing in line with what the revenue expectation was because we didn't let off the gas in a similar way. So the context of where we landed Thursday, beating the expectation, actually underspending by some extent that, and then on Friday being able to see how the revenue pacing by hour, where that was landing, then allowed us to make the decision to let's actually increase our ad spend volume against it to make sure that Friday lands really close to the goal.
Okay, so let's then jump into our next example, unless there's something else you want to hit here. And so for context, this is on Cyber Monday, and it's a similar kind of situation where there was a sense in which, like, if we had continued business as usual, that it would have missed a crucial target on Cyber Monday, but because of our hourly pacing, we were able to understand how we would need to adjust to get to where we needed to go. So let's jump into the second brand here.
Yeah, so this is a similar sort of example, but on a very different day of Cyber Monday, where the hourly pacing on Cyber Monday, your evening hours are going to be the strongest. On Black Friday, typically it's going to start tailing off those evening hours after the first half of the day into the early afternoon. So each of these days, the shape of revenue is really really important to understand. But what we can see here is starting pretty early on in the day, the 7 a.m. hour on forward, really through noon, really through midday, revenue was underpacing the expectation meaningfully. Some of these hours were missing expectation by 40%, 30% to goal for a number of subsequent hours there, which you play that out and Cyber Monday lands 30, 40% behind forecast, right? Well, where Cyber Monday actually landed for this business was minus 15% behind forecast in terms of the revenue outcome. We won't have time to sort of like put that in the context of where the other days were leading up to it. But it's safe to say this day was pacing to being really far off the target. And although it landed lower than forecast, it's a much better outcome than it was on pace to be over the course of those initial few hours that were pacing meaningfully off target. And so when we see the revenue pacing by hour for those early hours of the day, we can look at the ad spend target by hour. And what we see is a similar story, which is we're underspending the expectation meaningfully, right? And the year prior, what we can see in the hourly targets is the ad spend continued to climb up really through like the 9 a.m. hour, like 6, 7, 8, 9 a.m. just continued to stack higher ad spend. And then it sort of hit a plateau and then increased into the evening hours for the rest of the day. Well, for this day, we were underspending those morning hours pretty substantially, and we weren't really building them up the same way the year prior had. And so it's a pretty clear story to say here, our revenue's pacing meaningfully behind target, our ad spend pacing meaningfully behind target. We need to make some substantial changes or we're going to land 30, 40% behind the expectation for this day out of the weekend. And so that's what you can see is starting around the noon hour, spend starts to increase more and then builds up 1, 2, 3, 4 p.m. PST. And each of those hours outpace the spend of the prior year really substantially. And if we sort of cross that with what the revenue looked like is starting around the noon 1 hour is when we started to comp to the revenue by hour of the year prior. And the 2 p.m. PST actually beat the year prior after, again, those morning hours were pacing meaningfully off. And then the evening hours paced a lot closer to the expectation for the day prior. And in this case, I think it's the important thing to illustrate is how aggressive these early afternoon hours were in terms of the ad spend. They were substantially higher than the original target for those days. And that was a result of, one, having transparency to how much the morning hours were pacing behind. So knowing how much the specific amount of ad spend we had to go and make up, plus understanding the evening hours are the biggest on Cyber Monday. And so we really need to ramp up that volume prior to those evening hours to give us a chance at comping at those levels, which is what we ended up doing to bridge the gap from earlier in the day.
So again, like the clear lesson here being that let's say that we didn't have sort of hourly transparency into what was happening on Cyber Monday. Like you're saying, that line where you can see it being 40% below the previous year's performance, that kind of gap would have just persisted throughout the day and they would have ended up meaningfully behind. So essentially like what happened then is like you saw that in order to replicate the success or replicate the performance of the previous year or even beat it, there would have to be some sort of meaningful injection of ad spend over and against what you were originally planning to do. Is that correct? Like
Yes.
You had originally been planning to spend a lot less during that hour, but because we had some understanding of the way that the forecast or the plan would need to be broken in order to get the result that we wanted, we were able to meaningfully overspend where we had thought we were going to be at that hour or something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it sort of goes back to the framing of like, okay, what's the impact of having the hourly targets, especially in relation to the breakdown by hour compared to the year prior, is like, one, we can see where we're ahead or behind pace. That's the easier thing to get at, but quantifying the extent to which we're at or we're above or behind pace for each of these metrics, sales, spend, new customer revenue, CAC, Facebook spend, Facebook ROAS, Google spend, Google ROAS. So quantifying the exact amount that we're behind and then knowing what that means for the rest of the day to be able to stay on track is the most important thing. Okay, we're pacing behind the hour. Are we pacing behind, $2,000 in spend for each of these hours, or $20,000 in spend? What does that mean in terms of how aggressive our actions need to be in the afternoon to give us a shot at being able to comp in this specific example? So yeah, highlighting for every single metric, every single hour, are we ahead or behind? And then specifically by how much? That's what helps to inform the decisions around how we're going to adjust to make sure that trend doesn't persist or that it improves.
All right. Anything else that you want to hit on these, Luke?
I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think so. Don't know what we do without hourly trackers, and we want to build some for you all. So let us know if you're interested.
Yeah. So if you do want us to build a free Black Friday, Cyber Monday hourly tracking report with the purchase of a Prophit System, that's going on right now. That offer is going on right now for the next week or so. And this is, by the way, open to, unlike some of our other things, this is open to 7-figure brands as well. So if you're anywhere from 7 to 9 figures, this is absolutely going to change the way that you approach Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So obviously, I highly recommend it. I think one thing that worth pointing out too is that like the hourly shape of Black Friday and Cyber Monday is very specific in a way that like the hourly sort of customer behavior is not on other days. So there's like, because there's such like clear hourly changes, it's really, really important to understand how you're performing relative to those on an hourly basis as opposed to a daily basis. So anyway, if that's something that you want, and I think you do, you know where to find us, commonthreadco.com, hit that hire us button. Let us know that you're interested. We would love to chat. All right, I think that's going to do it for us. For Luke, the Weatherman Austin, which is of course his name on D2C Hotline or other podcasts, great talking to y'all, and we will see you all next time.